Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and this is my ranking of all 18 Marvel Cinematic Universe films, including the latest release, Black Panther. This is actually the first time I am ranking the Marvel Cinematic Universe here on this channel. I thought that the break right before we hit our next big team-up event, obviously Infinity Wars, was a great time to go ahead and rank all of the films in the series. And wow, this was a tough list to rank. Marvel has consistently, from the beginning, put out quality content. So it's really hard to differentiate between great and even greater. And while there are a couple on this list that are just okay and that I don't revisit very often, most every film in the MCU is at least solid. But the usual disclaimer, this is my personal list. This is just how much I personally enjoy these films. So it's not based on any sort of critical reception, on any Rotten Tomatoes score, or any objective measures, so to speak. This is just how much I enjoy them and which ones I personally think are the best. So we have a ton of films to get through in this ranking video, so let's not waste any more time, shall we? In at number 18, aka last place, I have Iron Man 2. I think I've only watched Iron Man 2 maybe twice. I really haven't revisited this film much because it didn't really hold my attention and it's not very memorable. Whiplash as a villain is overall just weak and kind of like, you're not even the main point of this film. And furthermore, you can see all of the scenes of them understanding that it's now time to build this universe and patchworking these new elements into this completely other film. Robert Downey Jr. is still great as Tony Stark, but it doesn't have rewatchability factor for me, and just as a film, it feels like a bit of a hodgepodge, and I think it's the worst made film. And at number 17, we have The Incredible Hulk. So no, not the Hulk that stars Eric Bana, but also not the Hulk that we come to see in later MCU films. This movie uniquely stands on its own, doesn't really tie in anywhere else, but is still part of the MCU. I actually don't think it's as daring and as forward-thinking as Ang Lee's Hulk, but it's not as endearing and as grounded and good as Mark Ruffalo's interpretation of the character. Edward Norton is perfectly fine in the role, and it does a serviceable job with the story. It has some fun moments, but it's kind of just like, what? Why is this even really a part of the universe? And it's a meh film at best. At number 16, I have Thor: The Dark World. So there's a lot of fun to be had actually in this sequel. The action sequences are big and fun, the jokes are super fun, and when you put Thor and Loki together in the same film, you automatically just have a fun chemistry that works. But the main storyline here is so forgettable. Our main villain and the Dark Elves may as well just have been cut out of the movie, because amongst a cinematic universe that is known for having bad villains, these ones are really bad, really boring, and super forgettable. Plus, the continued love story that isn't really a love story because it lacks any kind of chemistry with Jane Foster continues to take up way too much screen time. So while Thor and Loki are still great, there's just not a whole lot else to love about Thor: The Dark World. At number 15, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This was a huge disappointment, and even when looking at the film itself, there are sparks of greatness. There are such inventive, fun sequences splashed into Guardians 2 that it really makes you yearn for the movie that could have been. But unfortunately, there are about a million plot and storylines, and unfortunately only about one of them is given the time it needs to develop, but all of our heroes break off into smaller little missions, and they all get their own little sub-storylines, some of which have like another storyline within that sub-storyline. It turned Rocket Raccoon into a pretty unlikable character without his actual own redemption. The only redemption we see for Rocket comes through Yondu. And Drax is borderline unbearable in this film. Everything that comes out of Drax's mouth is horrible. But there are fun bits, there are funny sequences here in the movie. There are good jokes that land, and that opening sequence is amazing. And Baby Groot in general pretty much does no wrong for me. So it's just a big disappointment, and there's a lot that I really don't like about Guardians 2, but there's few shining moments where the potential shine through keep it out of being in the bottom 3. At number 14, I have Captain America, the First Avenger. There's also quite a bit that I do enjoy here. I actually enjoy the really light, comic-y, fun tone that Captain America has. It's almost hokey, but that fits with Captain America as he's written on the page. Plus, Chris Evans introduced as Captain America is wonderful, and I think Steve Rogers' relationship with Agent Peggy Carter is the best relationship in the entire MCU still, and that's really what props this film up. I thought they have great chemistry, and I love their interactions together. Plus, Hugo Weaving, although he hated playing the role, actually made a pretty good Red Skull. But it is a little bit all over the place. It is a little bit over the top with the shtick that it has going on here. The end is pretty anticlimactic. So I think Captain America, the First Avenger is a solid film. It's good for a Captain America movie. But it's nothing special, and it's definitely one of the least memorable films in the MCU canon. At number 13, I have Iron Man 3. There's a lot that I actually really love about Iron Man 3. A lot of these action set pieces are fantastic, and I think Tony's transformation in this film is also pretty awesome. But I am a person that doesn't love the bait and switch that happens here, and it doesn't actually come from a comic book loyalist standpoint, because honestly, I'm not really a big Iron Man comic book fan. My problem comes from the standpoint that Ben Kingsley created an awesome character. He was developing a wonderful villain that I wanted to see played throughout. The villain we got is still a very strong and formidable villain, but they should have just been put into 2 separate films. He shouldn't have been called the Mandarin. He shouldn't have been behind Ben Kingsley's character as Puppet Master. They should have just been put into their own storylines, and I think it would have worked better. Also, at the end, I think it jumps the shark a little bit. We get a little bit too crazy, a little bit too out there. And that kid gets a little bit on my nerves in the second act, and we spend so much time with him. But a lot of the action is great. The beginning of the film, where we see Tony's house going down, it's all wonderful. But it's such an uneven tone to the film. It's so up and down. It's like a roller coaster watching this movie that I couldn't put it any higher than 13th. At number 12, I have Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange does have beautiful visual effects. I really think the visuals in this film are maybe even some of the best in the entire MCU. Unfortunately, this is one of the later entries here that had a bit of sameness setting in. Doctor Strange followed the origin storyline to a T, and it did not deviate from that origins storyline, like, at all. And Stephen Strange himself is not a very likable character for much of the film. He is so abrasive and so kind of like know-it-all and in your face without having any warmth to his character that it's hard to come around to that, and it's hard to see past all of the sameness that you're watching. Of course, we all know about the whitewashing scenario here, in which I think it's a little bit less egregious than some of the other whitewashing controversies that have happened, but it's also super simple to fix. The way the character of the Ancient One is set up, it would have easily been able to be explained away, but they failed. They failed to do it. Plus we had this forced romance with Rachel McAdams throughout that never needed to be there. And then we had not only one, but two highly underutilized and disappointing villains. And that final battle scene, while a little bit inventive, was so underwhelming. We got a big old floating cloud as our final villain that does nothing. So Doctor Strange is a perfectly fine movie. It is a good movie. It is a fun movie to watch. Unfortunately, it comes so far down the line that I needed it to present something else, and it just didn't. At number 11, I have Ant-Man. Unlike Doctor Strange, Ant-Man actually does present a lot of new material here. It is a heist film and it is a comedy, and it succeeds mostly with both of those elements. I think it is a very funny film, and the heist elements, they work. They mix that comedy and the whole shrinking and expanding premise to great effect here. You feel the Edgar Wright influences still sprinkled into the script, and Paul Rudd is able to pull off his character very well. I do think Yellow Jacket is one of the more solid of the MCU villains. He's still not a great villain, and his whole storyline still feels kind of weak, but he's still a solid villain. Plus we get that great bit with Michael Pena retelling stories. It works very well. I think Ant-Man, again, suffers from feeling very familiar. Another redemption story for kind of a bad boy, for someone in prison. But I think it was just a little bit too light and too Paul Rudd for my personal taste, and that's why I just don't love it. It doesn't stick with me as I need to watch Ant-Man again. Ant-Man is definitely a character that I'm excited to see moving forward in small bits, because he was great in Civil War. He looks to be working off Evangeline Lilly very well for Ant-Man and Wasp, but when he's asked to be the crux of the entire film, I'm a lot less interested. So I like him in small doses, pun intended. But as a feature-length film, it's number 11. At number 10, I have Thor. I actually like Thor quite a bit, and more than most people seem to. It is a great, fun, funny, fish out of water scenario. And it came early enough in the MCU that it didn't feel recycled and old and been there, done that. Chris Hemsworth makes a fantastic Thor. And I thought the relationship with him and Jane Foster worked better here, certainly, than it does in The Dark World. Unfortunately, that relationship still just takes up too much time. And I wish we had spent more time up on Asgard, actually, and that's what kind of drags this down a little bit. But I just think Thor is a really fun, funny movie. I think Kenneth Branagh brings his brand in here, and it just works for me. So there are definitely 9 other Marvel films that mostly come later in the franchise that are just better overall, but I think Thor is still a good movie. So kicking off the top half of our list, at number 9, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. So we now have Spider-Man, Sony, working within the MCU, and I thought it worked well overall. I have a lot of nitpicky gripes with Spider-Man Homecoming, and I think overall as a film, it really struggled on being its own contained, smaller story, but also being forced to be part of this bigger MCU, and it didn't really find that balance for me. It failed on finding that balance. But I really think Tom Holland is a great Peter Parker and a wonderful Spider-Man. I think Michael Keaton's Vulture was a great villain that if he was just fleshed out a tad bit more would have been a all-time great villain. So this was a nice step forward, a nice rebound for Sony with the character of Spider-Man, and a nice first film for Spider-Man within the MCU. At number 8, I have Iron Man. The film that started it all. The one that kicked everything off. The one that hurt future films like Doctor Strange because it started the formula in which many of these films would follow. Iron Man is a pretty awesome movie. It introduced us to Robert Downey Jr. in his most famous role of his career at this point, and one of the best roles within the MCU. Tony Stark is the highlight here. He is the star, and it's wonderful to see him become the character of Iron Man. This film is funny, it's fun, I think the action is awesome when it does come into play, but unfortunately, it also started off the trend of pretty weak and forgettable villains. Jeff Bridges being the villain here should have been awesome, and should be one of the best villains in the MCU, but honestly, he's a bit forgettable. So that's kind of what keeps it from going even higher on my list and being one of like the best MCU films. Plus, I think the universe found its footing as it went on, but Iron Man is still a really enjoyable watch. At number 7, I have Guardians of the Galaxy. I know this might seem a bit like sacrilegious to people, and so many would probably have this at least in their top 5 favorite MCU films. And trust me, I also had a lot of fun. Being at number 7 is still a high placing on a competitive list. These characters are awesome. They're super fun, they're super likable, and you have a good time with them. And the adventure is also a whole lot of fun. Plus, this is probably one of Marvel's funniest films to date. Certainly top 3. I would probably say I think it's the second funniest film in the MCU. It's just a blast. This has rewatchability factor that very few of the other Marvel films have. However, the end of this film just really wrecked it for me. I thought it was so dumb and so ridiculous the way the final battle takes place that I was over it. I was like, are you kidding me? We really went there. Plus, Ronan the Destroyer as a villain was way weak. He looks awesome, but I mean, he's just a henchman and he doesn't do anything. And Gamora being one of the deadliest assassins in the entire Marvel universe is highly underused in this film. And those are the factors that kind of detract from an otherwise super fun and actually really heartfelt film. I think the scene with Groot, where We Are Groot takes place, is really, really touching. Actually, really great stuff. But just a couple of elements keep it from breaking in to the top 5 or higher. At number 6, I have Avengers: Age of Ultron. So this is a film that many don't really like or regard as disappointing. I actually think it's a solid film still. Clearly, I don't find it as good as the first Avengers film, but it is still really solid. While James Spader doesn't deliver maybe as menacing a villain as we were hoping, he's still a very good villain that comes this close to accomplishing his goal. He provides a very strong threat. He has some really great quips, an amazing design, and I think James Spader lives within the role really well. We're introduced to Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, both of which turn out to be really solid characters within the film itself. We get one of the few Marvel deaths that has stuck to this point, and some really, really great action sequences, including Hulkbuster versus the Hulk, which was just awesome. It also introduces some really solid ideas about artificial intelligence that really do a great job of shaping up this entire next phase of the MCU. So overall, maybe the villain was a little bit of a letdown and it's not quite as good as the first, but it's still a really good movie. At number 5, I have Thor: Ragnarok. One of the more divisive films in the MCU to date. A lot of people love it, but a lot of people really don't like Thor: Ragnarok. I, however, am one that had a ton of fun. This is MCU just straight up comedy. This is as close to a buddy cop style comedy as we've gotten in the MCU. This is Taika Waititi doing a really good Taika Waititi film on a big budget this time. And Chris Hemsworth shines as Thor. Thor develops in this film far more than he had developed in all of his appearances leading up to this point. And we finally get to see the God of Thunder being the God of Thunder. And it worked wonderfully. Plus, we're introduced to Valkyrie. People are hit or miss with Hela as well. I loved Hela. I thought Cate Blanchett was having fun and chewing that scenery up to great effect. The action is really fun and it's really funny. I laughed a lot. I think this is the funniest film within the MCU, and that's why it ranks all the way up at number 5 for me. At number 4, I have Captain America: The Winter Soldier. What a fantastic film. After the Avengers, this is one of those films that shocked everyone at just how good it was. A complete 180 in tone and action to the first Captain America film. This is the Russo brothers making a genre film with a superhero as a part of it. The action is great. The twists, the turns, the mystery of it all is fantastic. I loved Black Widow here, and this is the first time I really started to connect to Cap at a certain level. Falcon starts to get a little bit more to do, and the Winter Soldier as a character becomes something more. He becomes something of great intrigue within the MCU, and he's really developing into one of the best characters in all of the MCU. I have to admit that I do like my superheroes to be super, and I think that's what really has always kept me from being completely in love with the Winter Soldier and thinking it is the best film within the MCU, because it does lack the super part of being a superhero, but it is undoubtedly one of the best films that Marvel has offered thus far. At number 3, we see the latest entry finally make its appearance, and that is Black Panther. I loved this movie. I think it is fantastic. Starting us off, it is the 18th film in this universe, and it does not fall into any of the sameness that so many of the recent Marvel films have found themselves in. It feels fresh. It feels darker. It feels like the stakes are higher. And it does what Spider-Man Homecoming didn't do for me, and that's create a self-contained, smaller story that still had its place within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It tied directly into certain events, and it still was able to be a part of that, but it told its own story. You weren't wondering, why aren't the other Avengers flying in? No, we didn't need them. Plus, of course, the historical significance of the film is not lost, and it's so refreshing to see a new take, to see a new voice, to see a new vision within blockbuster filmmaking, but for this list in particular, Marvel filmmaking, to see new people brought to the forefront, to see a new culture brought up and showcased the way that they showcased Wakanda here. I mean, it was amazing. Plus, the action is great. Some of the CGI is a little bit wonky, but that could be said about many films on this list. T'Challa is a wonderful character. All of the women in this movie are some of the strongest, most developed, awesome characters that we've seen from females in the MCU. And that villain, we finally got another fantastic villain with Killmonger. And Michael B. Jordan kills it in the role. So I loved Black Panther. It may be slightly skewed, I'll admit that, because it is the one I saw most recently. But I do think it is one of the best offerings that the MCU has brought up to date. At number 2, the runner-up in my ranking is Captain America: Civil War. I love Civil War. I think this is a fantastic film, pretty much through and through. The end fight in this movie is my favorite part. And that's saying something in a film that has the big airport sequence and brings all of these characters together, that has the introduction of Black Panther, who turns out to be one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU. But when Tony and Steve come to head and we get that personal undertone to it, it was amazing to me. That was the grittiest, most real, most authentic thing that Marvel has done in any of its films. Because you could feel the hurt, you could feel the pain, you could feel the conflict. It was just fantastic. It was a brawl. Like, they literally put a brawl to the screen with Cap and Bucky fighting Iron Man. I mean, it's just amazing. The visual effects are great. All of our cameos, from Spider-Man to Black Panther to Ant-Man to Scarlet Witch, just really kind of owning these powers, though they're not really Scarlet Witch powers. It all worked perfectly for me. I think this movie is fantastic and clearly the second best film that Marvel has had to offer. And I really have almost no problems with it. I think Zemo is a fine villain because he's not really what the movie's about. This is Civil War, and he sets that Civil War up perfectly. So at number 1, my favorite film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is The Avengers. And this is probably a little bit cliched, but sorry not sorry, it is still my favorite Marvel film to date. Nothing has matched that theater experience of seeing these heroes assemble. I think Loki in this film is still the best villain that Marvel has put to screen because he is a big menacing threat. He is evil, but he's also really charming and awkwardly likable and gets a ton of screen time and development and steals most of the scenes he's in. The action is amazing. All of our characters are given their moments to shine. I loved the story. I loved the setup. I just pretty much love everything about the Avengers. It is the most rewatchable of the films for me, and I think it just works. It accomplishes something we really hadn't seen put to film yet in any of the comic book series, bringing this massive team together, something that could have felt overcrowded and just stuffed full of blah all over, but instead it meshed it beautifully into this wonderful team feel. The conflicts work, the resolutions work, it just works. So there it is. That is my ranking of all 18 Marvel Cinematic Universe films. What did you think of how I ranked the films? And more importantly, what is your MCU ranking if you've seen Black Panther at this point? Let me know your ranking either in the comment section down below, or you can hit me up on Twitter. Also, if you liked the video, go ahead, click like down below, and make sure to subscribe so you are always up to date on our latest content. I love you all so much for your support. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!